Hello, my name is Christian Swenson. I have autism, I'm autistic, and I do videos here on YouTube about autism, life on the spectrum, and autistic consciousness. And today I wanted to talk about a big part of life on the spectrum and autistic consciousness. Drum roll please. Time! The fear of time, and specifically change. The fear of change, which I think is the central aspect of autistic consciousness day to day. We like our routines. We like the way we do things in particular, in what order, when we do them, where we do them, and if that gets upset, we get upset. We live as our routines. We live in our routines. We identify with them. We are them in a way. And when they change, we feel like we're dead. We feel like we're dying. But unfortunately, we can't stop time in its tracks. Routines can and often do need to change, especially in this most perilous and unpredictable of times, 2020 and 2021. Which really upset a lot of people's routines, and I'm sure made very many autistic people very upset. But I wanted to give some advice today about how to deal with time, how to deal with change, how to deal with changes to routine, to when we do things, to where we do things, to the order we do things in. And hopefully this can help you deal with upsets like we experienced last year. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that we need to understand why we are putting the routine in the first place. There isn't just the routine. It hasn't been since the dawn of time. There's a reason you started doing it. There's a reason you started doing this certain thing at this certain time. And oftentimes when we do the routine, we kind of let the routine do us. We forget the why. We forget why it's there, the reason we're doing it. And therefore, when it changes, we can't see the why in that either. In other words, oftentimes when something changes, when a routine shifts, when I have to do something else when I'm used to doing this, the need that I fulfill through the routine, the purpose that the routine serves, can be fulfilled in another way. In other words, the routine is a how. But if you ask the question, why? Why is this routine here? We can answer that question in another way. So, for instance, let's say I have a routine of eating such and such food for breakfast at such and such time. That's good to have the routine do the work for me, because I don't have to exert willpower when I'm just following my habits. But if all of a sudden I can't eat that food, you can ask yourself, why was I eating this in the first place? Is it because I like this type of food? Well, is there another food like that I could make? Or you can say, maybe I'm doing it so that I don't get hungry in the afternoon or later in the morning, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find something else to eat. Because the something else to eat answers the question why in a different way, but fulfills the same function. In other words, I think a lot of the autistic rigidity around time and routine has to do with answering the question why in only one way. But you don't have to answer the question why in only one way. There is continuity. There is similarity between eating oatmeal for breakfast and, I don't know, eating hash browns for breakfast or eating eggs for breakfast. They are both ways to feed yourself. They are both, all three of them are nourishment, and that's a why. And if you ask the why this routine is in place, we can find some more flexibility in times when it's needed. Because the more ways you can answer why and kind of fulfill the same need, achieve the same purpose, the more flexible we can be. Sometimes it's hard, though. Sometimes it's difficult to shift from one track to another. You know, it's a train metaphor. And autistic consciousness is often like a train. We can go very quickly in one direction and go very deep, but it's hard to shift tracks. And one of the ways that I've found helpful to shift tracks when it's needed is to find continuity between the tracks. And that's a bit abstract, so let me explain. If I have to suddenly change my plans, go from one environment to the other, and all of a sudden, stop what I was doing and go to something else, it feels like everything I am has been left behind. It feels like who I am is in what I was doing. Who I am was where I am. But of course, that's not true. There are parts of you, in fact, all of you is continuing from one place to another, but as I pointed out in other videos, autistic people tend to identify the who with the where. We tend to feel like we are where we are. But even if you don't have that centered, rooted sense of self that neurotypical people seem to have, because I mentioned in another video how autistic people might not even have a self and how that's kind of a good thing, you can identify ways to find stability, find continuity between the different tracks. So say I have to change my routine of eating breakfast and now all of a sudden I have to go to the emergency room. Well, that upsets my routine. But there are going to be things that are in common between you at the breakfast table and you at the emergency room. So maybe, for instance, you have a fidget cube. The fidget cube is your continuity. It's in both places. Maybe it's in all places. The fidget cube reminds you that you're there. The fidget cube reminds you that the world here is the same as the world there, and that if you move between here and there, you're the same person you're the same person in both places. And so find continuity. As a part of that, something that's very helpful is, drum roll, a watch. A watch, and this is a kind of a stupid little digital watch here. It's not very expensive, like probably under $30. It's one of the Casio watches, but its battery life is basically infinite. It'll probably run out after like 10 years. I don't know. Maybe I'll be surprised one day. But it's a lot better than a smartwatch which you have to charge every night and you'll forget. What this does is it gives me continuity. It helps me know, oh, I am in the same process of time that I was at the breakfast table, that now I am in the emergency room. There is a safety in being carried by time. There is a safety in knowing that, oh, it is the same day or the same week or the same month that I do everything within that month. We all live on the same timeline, and this reminds me of that, right? And I can know, oh, here it is. It's, what time is it? It's 7:40 p.m. And so I know that even though I was showering just a few minutes ago, I took a late shower today, you can probably tell with my wet hair, even though 20 minutes ago I was in the shower, and this is a very different experience, the watch is in common, because it's also waterproof. Another thing, you can do lots of other things for that, right? Headphones can be very helpful. Maybe you can have kind of like an ambient thing that will stay the same from one context to another. One of the ways I like to do that is here in my workspace where I teach and where I work and do other things. It's a standing desk with a treadmill. I have a monitor over there. It's kind of a swivel TV, and it's a bit embarrassing, although a bit weird. I have it playing a continuous playlist on YouTube of video game long plays, and I never know which one it's going to play, but it's always playing something, and that's always playing. And so whatever I'm doing here, that's there, and it's always the same. And no matter how different this is, that's the same. And so you can find continuity in all sorts of creative ways. Find ways that wherever you are, whenever you are the same. And you know that, and you're reminded of that. As a part of that, it's also very useful to use a calendar. In combination with this, obviously. Use a calendar like Google Calendar. Plan out your days, right? Get a sense for how the day feels, how it feels to transition from the morning to the afternoon. Get a feeling for that. Get a feeling of how it feels to transition from the afternoon to the evening. Feel the day, right? Feel how the day is both one thing and many things. And get a feeling in advance for the day you're going to live. You know, plan your day out reasonably, but not too reasonably, because a day is always unpredictable. And learn the balance between what can be predicted and what can't. Learn the difference between what you can reasonably plan and what you can't. There are some parts of the day, probably, that are going to be much easier to plan than others. Some things you have to do, like classes, and those will be pretty easy to plan. And then other times of the day, there might be people or situations that often are very different that call you at the last minute. And you can't plan those parts very well. And so learn the dynamics of time. Learn that your calendar, even though it points to the day you're going to experience, it's kind of like a map that describes a country or a landscape. Just like the map isn't the landscape, the calendar isn't the day or the week or the month. Learn the feeling of the day, the week, and the month, and try to see that feeling in the calendar. Try to feel the morning in the calendar of the morning. Try to feel the Tuesday in the calendar of the Tuesday, right? And you start to tie the world together that way. You start to integrate your experience of life in a way that's very healing and very comforting. So that's it, basically. I hope that was very helpful. I hope it was at least some helpful anyway. I post here every week, speaking of consistency. And if you wouldn't mind, please like, please subscribe, maybe click the bell button. That's what people say these days. And I'll see you next week. See ya.